On today's show, we'll be joined by NBA insider Howard Beck to discuss the perception about the Houston Rockets culture around the league, how Ime Udoka is set to change that culture, the future of players like Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., and Alperen Sengun, as well as whether or not a James Harden return makes sense for the Rockets, and what is the best possible outcome with the number 4 overall pick in this year's NBA draft. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
Hey, Houston fans, I am so happy.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA, and when you enter promo code LockedOnNBA, they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with every single order. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on the way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for making LOR part of your day every single day. Joining us now is renowned NBA insider Howard Beck, who you can follow on Twitter at Howard Beck. What up, Beck? How's it going, man? So excited to have you join the program.
Appreciate that, Jackson. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're ready to talk a little Houston Rockets basketball with you. And where I want to start is actually, this past season, it really feels like, over the course of this last season, there was this really negative perception about the Rockets organizationally, about the culture in Houston. And I want your take on, is this legitimate versus maybe just a side effect of bottoming out for 3 straight seasons in a row?
Well, it's probably both. And yeah, there's a pretty negative perception of them at the moment. It is a combination of things. I don't think people around the league have thought that this rebuild has been handled quite as deftly as possible. I think there's a sense that, the young players they've invested in, if you don't see some, clear progress and evolution, you start to question player development. And I think there's a little bit of that coming into play here. I think the fact that they've just kind of looked a little directionless, both from the macro and micro view on the court and off. And, every team, if you have a tear down, and especially when it was a forced tear down, right? Like they weren't planning on blowing it up until all of a sudden they had to blow it up. You still have some expectation that you find your bearing somewhere along the way, and a direction comes into focus. Now, the only direction we know for sure, the agenda we know for sure, is that they want to jump back into contention or relevancy sooner than later, right? We know that there's an urgency there from the very top. But in terms of the way it's played out, I also just think that there are varying philosophies about how to rebuild and how much to invest in youth and at what point you need to start pivoting toward spending and putting some veteran talent around them. There's always that careful balance between developing really high level young talent as they have there from the last couple of drafts, and giving them room to grow, to make their mistakes, to get their reps and all that, versus how much do you bring in veterans to stabilize things, mentor, but without cutting into that vital playing time and the responsibility of growing into a leading role. And so, again, like globally, broadly, those are the kinds of things that a team often grapples with. And it seems like what the Rockets have done is just, lean hard into, we're just going to get as many of these young guys as we can. We're just going to set them loose and see where it goes. And the results have been a little messy, but on some level, there's a little, I don't want to say it's planned, but you probably figure at the moment that Harden and Westbrook are gone and you're plunging into a rebuild that was forced on you. You're probably planning on the fact that you're going to be losing, whatever, tanking, however you want to frame it, for a couple of years, because that's the best way back. I shouldn't say the best way back. That is the most obvious way back to relevancy, is to lean into it, let yourself be bad enough to get multiple bites at the apple. I've always said this as kind of a broad defense of what the Sixers did with the process, and it was not a defense of them morally or philosophically, but just, yes, they missed on some picks. The point of being a bad team multiple years in a row is the acknowledgement that the lottery is fickle, the draft itself and scouting is fickle, and the more chances you get to draft a potential superstar, the better off you are, because if you miss on Jahlil Okafor and Markelle Fultz, well, at least you got Embiid and Ben Simmons, who at least once upon a time was looking like one of the best players in the NBA. So I don't begrudge the Rockets having a 3-year run of high lottery picks, because that is one way to get back and to get some good young foundational pieces. If not multiple, then maybe at least one of them proves to be the guy. And I think the tough part for them right now is that 3 years later, we don't really know. And so any season could be the one that Jalen or Jabari pop, right? Like, they're young and it takes time, and people get very impatient in this league and among fan bases, and I certainly get that too. But I do think like that's the issue now for them is, well, all right, so where is this going? Who's leading the charge here? How many more years of losing is there going to be? And I think some of the things they're doing now, including the hiring of Ime, indicates that they are trying not to stay here very much longer.
Yeah, I do want your thoughts on Jalen, Sengun, Jabari, kind of the young core moving forward for this Rockets team. But the guy leading the charge, you mentioned that a moment ago, it is Ime Udoka, right? They hired Ime Udoka. What does he do for kind of just, I guess, the perception, how others view the organization? Kind of what does that say about where the organization is headed now with bringing Udoka in?
Yeah. So I was on Locked On Pistons a couple weeks back, and one of the things I said got either willfully or maybe unintentionally misinterpreted. So I'll just clarify it here in case any of your listeners went down this same, I think, rather dumb rabbit hole. I was asked on the Pistons podcast, listen, these two teams took a very different approach to their coaching searches. The Pistons have focused on longtime assistants or guys who have not been head coaches yet, and the Rockets looked like they were really going for a name and somebody established. And I said, yeah, it is, and I hadn't really thought of it until I went on the pod, but I'm like, it is an interesting contrast, and I think it does speak to organizational priorities that the Pistons, it would seem to me, if they're going with a first-time head coach, are acknowledging that we've got a good young core, we believe in that young core, but we know we're not ready to win at a high level yet, so it's okay to go and get a coach who's going to maybe grow with them, and as a first-time guy, we don't have to worry about turning this around instantly. There's some patience built into the idea that you're going with a first-time head coach as well. Now, granted, Ime Udoka was a first-time head coach when he was hired by the Celtics, and they went to the finals immediately. But I think in general, it's safe to say that route, first-time head coach with young team, means you're not expecting instant results. Whereas with the Rockets, I said that there was an urgency, clear, and I said, and even a desperation. And I said that because the Rockets owner, Tillman Fertitta, as you know, is a guy who's not known for being particularly patient, is kind of impulsive, is known around the league as a bit of a meddler in basketball ops, and is has made it pretty clear, like he wants to get out of this thing sooner than later, and said, so them landing on Ime Udoka or another established name to me was emblematic of that approach. We want to turn this around immediately. So then somebody twisted that to say, like, you're calling Ime a desperation hire. I'm like, no, he's not a desperation hire. Their agenda as an organization, the tenor of the organization, the tone right now is indicating a certain urgency and desperation to get back on track sooner than later. Ime Udoka is a fantastic hire as a head coach. Listen, quick aside, yes, there was some stuff that happened in Boston, the details of which we are still mostly ignorant about. And I do not mean to diminish any of that at all. And I think different organizations might have approached it differently about whether or not they would hire Ime. But on the merits as a coach, I think he's a fantastic hire for his ability to mold players, particularly young players, his leadership skills, his kind of old school approach. He's a bit of a hard ass in the best way. And And I think that was what the Celtics needed at that time. It may well be what the Rockets need at this time. So if your goal is to get this thing turned around sooner than later, that's the right kind of coach. And, in terms of the players that he's inheriting, look, they're young, and the way that they're viewed around the league is like, this is a group that has been lacking structure, that needs accountability. And if their young players don't start learning good habits soon, I'm not sure I believe this, but there are those who believe that you start to learn bad habits and they're just kind of embedded in you for the rest of your career. I'm not sure I believe it's as permanent as that, but especially with a guy like Jalen Green, who's a super talented young player who can do a lot with the ball in his hands. Those players in this league, there's always this added burden of trying to figure out the balance between when to shoot, when to pass, when to be concentrating on your teammates and getting them going versus yourself, the kinds of shots you take, your shot selection. And I think having a somebody who's going to come in and provide maybe more structure, and this is not a critique of Stephen Silas, who I have a high regard for, but definitely a much different personality than Ime. And so I think the view is that Udoka's the right player, the right coach for this group of players at this time, but that's only one step. They've got other work to do, obviously.
Coming up, what are some of those next steps for the Rockets' young core? Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith Jr. Also, does a James Harden return make sense for this Houston Rockets team? We're going to get there in just one moment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Look, I wasn't a big shorts person until I got myself some Bird Dogs. Now I rock those things everywhere I go. You ask anybody in my personal life, friends, family, whatever, hey, do you ever see Jackson wearing shorts? Nope. Jackson shorts? No, he would never wear shorts, right? I would basically wear jeans, slacks, sweats, hip to ankle, long pants all the time. Because, if I was going to the gym or whatever, basketball shorts, that's fine. But I always felt weird, go to a restaurant or on a date or hanging out with friends. I never really had a pair of shorts that I thought were comfortable, stylish, fit well until Bird Dogs. You got to check them out. They will be the most comfortable, best fitting shorts you will ever own in your life. Don't believe me? Go check it out. And right now, with every purchase, when you go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA, with every purchase, when you enter promo code LockedOnNBA, they will throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler. It is such a nice little tumbler. I'm already drinking coffee out of it. It's incredible. So go check them out, birddogs.com. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball, chatting with NBA insider Howard Beck. Now, Howard, when you look at Jalen Green, through his first 2 years as an NBA player, bit of a mixed bag, maybe hasn't quite taken what some would have hoped to be that year two leap. There were a lot of comparisons maybe to an Anthony Edwards-esque trajectory for him, or at least some optimism that he might take that kind of a leap in his sophomore campaign. So right now, what's your read on how he's progressed to this point through 2 years, and what is his biggest barrier to becoming a star player in today's NBA?
Yeah, so look, he's only 21, and I think it's interesting to think about some of the other second-year guys this year as just kind of a quick reference point. Scotty Barnes, Evan Mobley, who were the top two guys for Rookie of the Year a year ago, and they both had seasons where fans, pundits, everybody are like, wait, hold on, where's the next step here? I thought we were going to see this leap in their sophomore season. And those were the two best rookies in the class by Rookie of the Year voting. And so just as a quick reference point, I think it's worth everybody remembering that growth in this league is not linear, and young players, even if you showed some real sparks as a rookie, sometimes there is maybe a little brief plateau before you take the next leap. I also think that as much as you want guys to get reps, this alludes back to the earlier discussion, there's such a thing as too much in your hands all at once, and not having, if you're not expected to win, and they weren't, you're not working toward anything except maybe your stats. And I'm not accusing Jalen Green of being a guy who's going for his stats. I'm just saying that if all else fails, it's like, we're not making the playoffs. We're not really competing. Everything becomes like a pickup game. And I think so, rather than judge Jalen Green or anybody else on that roster individually, I think the environment has been one where there's no expectation. Everybody knows this was going to be a few years, and they didn't have a lot of veterans around them to maybe teach good habits or provide more structure, and so you're probably just going to do what feels right in the moment, and that might lead to some of the bad habits. Broadly speaking, yeah. Listen, obviously he needs to improve as a shooter. His shot selection certainly needs to improve. I think it's a little bit of a bad sign when you're taking, whatever, 3.5 more shots per game in your second season, but shooting at a much lower effective field goal percentage. Like there's that doesn't match up. You should be, if you're gonna have that much more offense in your hands, that much more usage, it should be because you have gotten to a point where you're being more efficient with it too. But again, given what they had around them, it's hard to be too judgmental there. So he has to improve. I think shot selection, playmaking, his 3-point shooting, all of which could probably fall into place better if they had like a true point guard next to him, a veteran point guard next to him. Like, I'm not suggesting this is the move to make, but like, hey, I think they look a lot different if Mike Conley is sitting there, right? Even the Timberwolves looked a lot different when all of a sudden Mike Conley was sitting there instead of D'Angelo Russell.
Yeah, a true table setter.
Yeah, and also just somebody who has been there, done that, knows it all, universally respected. There's only so many Mike Conleys, so I'm not suggesting that is, again, necessarily the move, or if it's the right time for that move, right? The Timberwolves were further along too, and the Timberwolves had a different kind of desperation, which was, oh crap, we made this big swing for the fences and things aren't working out so well. We better do something else. And they, they certainly needed a Mike Conley.
Let's reunite Rudy Gobert with his old pal Mike Conley, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Jalen Green, right? He's got, still a ways to go, but then you also look at Alperen Sengun and the flashes that he's had, through his first 2 years. He gets comped all the time, nicknamed Baby Jokic, all that stuff. There are some legitimate concerns about maybe his limitations on the defensive side of the basketball, right? He's not, a towering big man like Jokic is. He stands at, a whopping 6'9". So if you're playing him at your 5 spot, along with some of maybe the physical limitations, there are question marks about him. But where do you think the confidence level should be in Alperen Sengun being a true centerpiece of this organization, of this rebuild moving forward?
People around the league are really high on Alperen Sengun. They love him. That was a great pick. And his development so far, I think has been promising. Your point is well taken. Like Jokic, and granted, Jokic is also much bigger, but Jokic is. I've made this point recently about Jokic and Sabonis in Sacramento, where I think it's an interesting conundrum of the modern NBA. Maybe it would have been in any era, frankly, but if you've got an elite offensive player, and I'm not saying that Sabonis are all at the same level, but somebody who is like, this is a vital piece, somebody who can do a lot with the ball in their hands as a playmaker and scorer, who we think is a core piece for us moving forward. But he's not only a big, but maybe his best position is center. And you do need rim protection in this league. Most teams need some semblance of that. So how do you manufacture at least average defense, if not better, a top 10 defense, if your big man, who is one of your central foundational pieces, is not a rim protector? So that's what the Nuggets have had to figure out over time, right? And so they go out and they get KCP, and they got Aaron Gordon, and they've started to create a defensive approach elsewhere that has maybe offset a little bit of Jokic not being your classic, 7-foot rim protector. The Kings now have that burden. It's a little different in Sacramento because I don't think Sengun is necessarily as he's not the centerpiece of the way that Jokic is, or even the way that Sabonis kind of is co-centerpiece with De'Aaron Fox. But I do think, and look, this is a premature discussion in some sense. They have so many other things they have to figure out. But Sengun is a really talented, an intuitive basketball player who I think has a very bright future. And among the challenges the Rockets have is building a defense, period, anyway. and
I
just
guess
building out the roster, right?
And not to interrupt you, I think that's what makes it such an interesting angle, is because at what point do you identify and are you willing to commit to when you've seen enough from him to say, you know what, okay, now we're willing to take that step, like Denver, like Sacramento, to kind of tailor this defense to suit his weaknesses a little bit better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I would say it's too soon to have that discussion at a real meaningful level, because you're still trying to kind of figure out what this core is. And but I do think it's something you keep in mind. And I think, frankly, any rebuilding team, look, a rebuilding team, whether it's the Thunder over the last couple of years, and they've done a fantastic job, obviously, and they look ready to break through.
We can't say that. We can't say positive things about the Thunder on this podcast.
I'm sorry. I retract the statement. I will say nothing about draft picks or trades that might have happened between the two teams. Strike it all from the record.
Don't remind me. All right.
It's funny, as I bounce around all the Locked On pods, like the landmines and the PTSD that I have to be mindful of in various fan bases. Like, I sometimes forget, like, this is a very specific audience, and there's sometimes some longstanding pain involved. But I just think that when you're a rebuilding team, the first step toward becoming good again, aside from just get some talent, but it's usually you figure out the offense first, right? And then a bad team becomes competitive again by. And look, there's probably some examples in the other direction where they figured out the defense first. It's usually
Cavaliers, right?
Yeah, there you go. But along the way, Darius Garland popped as an all-star lead guard, right? And then they grafted on Donovan Mitchell after that. But yeah, defense, they're kind of leading with their defense. That's a good example. But usually it's you have found a guy who can be your offensive engine, or a couple of them. And then you figure out how to build around them, because a lot of offensive engine type players are not great two-way players. Yeah. Unless you're fortunate enough to be like, say, the Boston Celtics. There's no PTSD on the Celtics, right? I
think we're good on the Celtics. In fact, we can lord it over them. The Rockets have Ime Udoka now, so there you go.
There you go. All right, cool, good. But Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, you knew from an early stage that these were guys who had the ability to be, I think, elite two-way wings, and especially Jaylen Brown, I think, early on kind of established some of that, and they had Marcus Smart. But usually your rebuild is going to start with find elite offensive players, and then you figure out how to build out a defense around them, or try to nudge them along as defenders. I think the Rockets are still a couple steps away from having to make those kinds of decisions.
Coming up, where do we see Jabari Smith Jr. 5 years from now? Does a James Harden return make sense for this Rockets team? And what's the best outcome in this year's NBA draft? We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Howard, the kind of tertiary piece of this Rockets rebuild, Jabari Smith Jr. had a rough start to his rookie campaign, likely due to a lot of the points that we've already discussed in this show, lack of structure, kind of minimal identity here in Houston, unfortunately. And I think he was kind of he dealt with some adversity because of that this past season, but he really came on strong later in his rookie year. You started to kind of see the vision for what, why he was kind of projected to be the number one overall draft pick for much of the previous draft cycle. Where do you see him 5 years from now? What do you see his role, his effectiveness, his ceiling? What do you think he can be?
Look, obviously, as I said earlier with Jalen Green, and in this case, 1 year more so, very young, 20 years old, rough rookie season, especially for a pick for that high. It's tough. It was suggested to me by somebody from another team that the mere fact of him slipping a little in the draft maybe hurt his confidence from the get-go. And then, you have to look at his rookie season through the prism of everything we discussed earlier, which is that this is a team that hasn't had a lot of structure and accountability, and has a couple of guards who kind of dominate the ball. And, so for Jabari to come in and try to carve out some space for himself and try to do the things that a really high pick wants to do. And everybody comes in with that too, by the way. Again, this is not to imply selfishness or anything else, but there's a pride factor. When you're a really talented young player, the pride that comes with that and the expectations that come with it, and certainly people around you, family and friends and whatever, you're supposed to be in the running for Rookie of the Year. You're supposed to be putting up big numbers, but you come into a team with some other young guys who also still have a lot that they want to prove. And again, lack of structure, lack of accountability on this team. And, you get the sense sometimes that maybe Jabari was forcing some shots early that maybe weren't the best shots because he just wasn't confident he was going to get another opportunity. The ball wasn't going to come back to him. And so I think there's a little bit of just that struggle to carve out an identity at the same time that you've got other players who are young and trying to carve out their identity. And so I wouldn't place a lot of stock or judgment in his rookie season. He's got, obviously great tools. He's got switchability as a big. So defensively, he should grow into a very versatile player. And the shot will improve, and he's got great footwork. I just think that he's another one, like all of them. He's going to benefit from them starting to make some tougher decisions this summer about how are we going to build. Is it time to bring in some vets? I suspect it is. Again, you don't hire Ime Udoka without, I would think, some plan to also start to fortify the young core. And once Jabari has a little bit more of that structure around him, I think, we'll see his chance to thrive. So I think his ceiling is still, what you would expect the ceiling to be, whether that's multiple time All-Star, whether it's contending for All NBA, whatever. I try not to project too far out with these guys because so much of this depends on the things that we can't tell, especially from a distance. A lot of guys come into this league with a ton of talent, and then the rest depends on the team they're drafted to, their player development, and then a lot of internal stuff. What's your work ethic? What's your motor? How committed are you? How much do you actually care? Are you happy just to be here? Which, as DeMar DeRozan and Pat Beverly have both alluded to recently on separate shows or podcasts, there are a lot of guys in this league who just love to be there because it's a good paycheck and a nice lifestyle, and maybe don't love the game. And the questions about those things, who really loves the game, who's going to work, all that, I don't think those are that easy to tell. And teams will, of course, do all this homework before the draft and the pre-draft process and interviews and all this intel gathering, and they still will be, either pleasantly surprised or horrified later. And so I don't know, I don't know where some of these guys on the Rockets fall in that, on that spectrum. But those are the things that determine, like when we talk about where's this guy going to be in 5 years, if you could tell me how hard he's going to work and how committed he is and how much he loves the game, I'd have a better beat on it.
We talked a little bit earlier mentioning Mike Conley and the, this Rockets' desperate need for, a legitimate point guard, floor general. When you look at all the rumors, the smoke about a potential James Harden return, does it make sense for simply that reason alone? Is that he would elevate the team just simply with his playmaking alone?
The best case scenario would be that. The best case scenario, I'm going to say it first before I destroy it. The best case scenario is that the James Harden we saw in his early stages with Brooklyn and in parts of his time with Philly is a guy who late in his career has decided, I'm not going to dominate the ball anymore. I'm going to be a great setup man. He's a fantastic playmaker when he decides he wants to focus on that. And yeah, great, cool. Plug him in, maybe ship out, Porter, and now Harden runs the show. Jalen Green settles in at shooting guard, and everybody else finds it. Cool, nice idea. I don't buy it for a second. Okay. I think the idea of a James Harden reunion is horribly conceived on every end of it. I don't understand why James Harden wants to return. No knock on Houston, the city, Houston, the franchise. I just don't understand why James Harden at this point in his career wouldn't want to stay attached to Joel Embiid, or if he's going to leave Joel Embiid, go somewhere else where you can contend for championships. It's the only thing he doesn't have on his resume, and it's going to be a knock on him forever and ever. And after this postseason, still, if he doesn't find a way to break through, I don't understand why he would leave a situation where he can contend every year for a rebuilding team that is years away from being at that level again, especially at this stage of his career. He can't carry a team anymore by himself. And just as setup guy, like James Harden has said out loud more than once in the last year about trying to be the old James Harden. Well, the old James Harden has a usage rate of like 35. Like, that's not a great recipe for your young players in Houston either. So for the Rockets, who are not ready to contend, who do have impressionable young guys, Harden doesn't exactly have a rep as the best of examples among veterans. Like, yeah, you want some veterans now. I don't know that he's the right kind of veteran we're talking about. I like, to me, if this ends up happening, I will just be flabbergasted. Like, I get it. Like, there's an emotional attachment probably from both sides. There's a bunch of other stuff, but my God, this guy forced his way out by basically tanking a preseason in the first few weeks of a season, and you're going to bring him back? Like, there's nothing about this, like I say, from anybody's vantage point, that makes a lick of sense to me.
When you look at this year's NBA draft, Rockets landed the number 4 pick. They missed out on the Victor Wembanyama sweepstakes. What would you consider a winning outcome utilizing that pick, either trading up, trading down, trading out, who you would take at number 4? What would you consider the best possible winning outcome for the Rockets with that pick?
I'm tempted to say that because you still have just a vague sense of where you're going with Jabari and Jalen and Sengun, why not? If this may be because of excuse me, picks that you do owe, because of picks that you, sorry, because of picks that still have to go out, and because you are clearly trying to turn the corner now, you might not be picking this high again for a very long time. I'm tempted to say either keep the pick and use it, move up if you can, whatever. I'm tempted to say that. Add one more piece, right? It's back to my Sixers example. You're going to miss on a couple guys. Not everybody's going to click.
One more bite at the apple.
One more bite at the apple, maybe the last one for a while. I'm tempted to go there. But man, there is so much volatility in this draft. Like, it feels like half of the top 10 are in positions where they might want to move down or move out or move up. And there have been previous years where we thought, oh man, there's going to be fireworks on draft night. All these picks are getting traded, and it didn't happen. So I don't want to project that, but you know, Portland probably could or should move the pick. The Rockets, you can make that case for. There's several others. So I'm just curious to see where it goes, you know, in a month or so when we hit draft night. If the Rockets could get a real impact veteran, all-star level or close to that, and I'm not saying just that. I don't want to sell the pick short. But if you're trying to accelerate the rebuild, you've got all that. You've got, you know, whatever, up to $60 million in cap room. You've got other ways you can go this summer. But if you thought that the 4th pick could get you one piece, and then the free agency gets you another piece, and then you still keep some cap room for flexibility purposes, whatever, maybe that's the way to go. And again, like, I'm not the one with the urgency. I don't care if they win again this coming season or not, but they seem to. And if the urgency is there, then I think you start to consider trading the pick. If you can be patient, and I don't think that they are, but if you could be patient, like I said, I think I'd be tempted to draft one more big piece.
Howard, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the show today. Let our listeners know where they can track you down at.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm bouncing all around the Locked On network. Only the NBA shows. I don't know anything about hockey. So fortunately, it's a limited engagement here. So bouncing around Locked On Pod Network, writing for GQ Sports at the moment. So that's at gq.com. All of my written work is also on my Authory page, which is author with a Y on the end. So authory.com/Howard Beck. Everything I've written for GQ, that I wrote for Sports Illustrated, New York Times, Bleacher Report is all there as well. So please go check that out.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also available on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.